Welcome to the T2 Hubcast. Join T2 and guests as they discuss all things personal and professional development. The T2 Hubcast, brought to you by the People Performance People.
So welcome to the T2 Hubcast with me, Martin Johnson.
And me, Tracy Roberts.
Good morning, Tracy. Afternoon, is it?
Just.
Good day.
How many coffees have you had?
This is my second.
Okay, so that's a good excuse.
So I'm going to get more wired as the podcast goes on, which will be amazing. So let's just say good day, because we don't actually know what time it is.
Good day to you all.
Good day from Planet T2. Okay, so we've been working quite a bit on a concept around leadership. I call it the chasm of supportive, assertive leadership. You've been talking about dialing up daring leadership, and we've sort of created a model and arrived at making sense of this now. We've previously done a podcast on the chasm of supportive, assertive leadership. So if you haven't listened to that one, try and check that one first and get the definition of it. But this podcast, we're going to dive into it a little bit more.
Yeah, literally into the chasm.
Into the chasm, and have a good chat about it, because in all of the projects we work on, all of the organizations we are exposed to, when we look at high performance versus underperformance, we can absolutely look at where the most optimal forms of leadership are. And we've concluded that it's not an exact science.
No.
We know that. And you can be any type of leader. You can be more empathetic and supportive and people focused. You can be more driven and task and goal focused. But for all high-performing environments, I think it's safe to say, Tracy, that those who drive it and who sustain it over a period of time, they balance both being supportive and assertive as a leader in equal measure at the right times.
Yeah.
And that's the chasm, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just knowing when to deploy what and, keeping it in balance.
And I know you might be sat there thinking, well, supportive, assertive is a very simplistic way. There's loads of different leadership styles, and there's loads of different leadership models and methodologies and personalities. And yes, there is. But if you really think about it, you can summarize all of those different styles, qualities, and models into two types of leadership. You will either be more assertive as a leader, which is I'm going to drive commitment from the people around me. I'm going to make sure that there's accountability. Yeah. I'm going to set some expectations, and I'm going to ensure that the results are achieved. Yeah. That's what we mean by assertive.
Yeah.
That
requires task and goal focus.
Yeah, that requires naturally a little bit more focus on the outcomes of what we're here to achieve. Yeah. Supportive leadership would be underpinned by lots of different styles, like compassionate leadership, empathetic, engagement, development, support. You know, all of the things where you put the human first, and you're saying to someone, I've got your back, I'm going to support you, and we're in this together. And I guess if we just quickly define the two in terms of the challenge, if you are more assertive than supportive, if you're focused more on the outcomes and achievements and results, then you are going to drive results and accountability, but potentially at the cost of your people.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you're more supportive, brilliant, wonderful human being, everybody loves you, but you might lose a little bit of that accountability, urgency, commitment, respect, whatever it might be, your ability to get stuff done if you're overly on the supportive side.
Or be taken advantage of.
It's a really, probably a really common one.
Yeah.
So the chasm is in the middle between the two, where leaders, and this is the first thing we're going to say, T, leaders firstly recognize what their default position is.
Yes.
Are they more likely to be a supportive leader because of their traits, motivators, personality style? Or are you more likely to be on the assertive side as a default position?
Yeah.
Because then and only then can you understand what your step into the chasm, what the direction is for you, whether you have to dial it up from supportive or dial it down from assertive.
Yeah.
So first question, where do you think you sit as a default position?
I'd like to think I'm in the chasm, but I think if I had to lean more into just what I've done over the years, I guess maybe there'd probably be, well, I guess by default of my print on both. That's a good answer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because my 8's an assertive and my 2 is over the other side. but I think I usually go people first. So I would probably be more in support, but I'd like to think I do get the balance most of the time.
Yes, I think you do a great job. It's probably why you're in the position here at T2. You do a great job of finding the chasm. I think there is that healthy balance between being supportive of people and not being taken advantage of, and actually making sure people do what you need them to do and hold people to account. I definitely think that's you. But in your default position, I think you're naturally more wide on the supportive side.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, for example, if you could get something done in a preferred way, then with and through people, with collaboration, support, and empathy is your 100%. Preferred way.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it by any means necessary. I'm not that type of person, I think. Or I could do that, but I wouldn't feel authentic and I would lose sleep over it. I could make the decision if I had to.
But you'd dwell on it afterwards.
I'd dwell on it afterwards. I had to do several things in my career that I haven't enjoyed and go towards that assertive side. But it depends on the nature of the subject as well, doesn't it? Yeah.
But I think you would always try as a first port of call to solve it amiably with people, collaboratively with people.
Fairly, yeah, definitely.
And then if not, you'll step across into the chasm and be a bit more assertive and make sure that Whereas I think for me, I have no problem in saying this because I don't think it's a bad thing. I 100% as a default position sit on the assertive side. And that's not assertive, not saying I'm a dictator controller and I'm going to bully people into submission. But my default position naturally is to create urgency, to create a clear goal and outcome, to wrap a load of accountability around that, and to make sure that we are progressing every second and every day towards that endeavor.
Yeah.
And then for me to get into the chasm, I've got to think about making sure people are happy, fulfilled, and supported along the way.
Yeah.
And do you know what? After doing it for a period of time, it starts to become a little bit, me finding the chasm now becomes much more natural than it used to be.
Yeah.
Because you see the rewards of doing that and then you repeat the behavior, just as you see the rewards of being a bit more assertive and you repeat the behavior. Yeah. But if you're listening to this, the first thing I think you've got to think about as a leader is through your psychometrics or whatever you've done in the past, your self-awareness, which side of the chasm do you naturally sit on? Are you more supportive, which is compassion, empathy, engagement, development and support, people first? Or are you more task first, which is assertive, commitment, accountability, expectations, results? And there's no right or wrong. It's just the way you operate.
I think you can change as well, because I'm just reflecting now, actually, just back in my career a little bit, and I can definitely remember being more assertive but not feeling comfortable with it. So if I go back to my early career in leadership when I first left the forces, I think I carried some of that leadership style over a little bit and kind of went more directive and sort of like just didn't bark orders, so to speak, but kind of went, right, let's just get this done. And I was very task focused. I think my sort of other side of things came naturally through as I went through my leadership journey, and I realized it sort of started to unfurl a little bit, that actually you can get it done by being a little bit more empathetic. But my natural default setting way back at the beginning, because of what I'd experienced in the forces, was tell people what to do, give them clear instructions, and set your mind to the task almost. So I think I can reflect back now and say 15, 20 years ago, it would have been different. Now I swung the other way and actually have been taken advantage of a few times. So now that's why I know what it's like to be in both sides. So I think that's maybe what helps me understand that chasm a bit more.
You raise a really good point, because if you're listening to this, we're not saying that you just sit on one side and you have to die. So if you just sit on assertive like me, you don't have to. I don't just always sit on assertive and have to dial it into the chasm. You don't always sit on supportive and have to dial it up to the chasm. We can both sit on either side, given an environment, a situation, and the people involved. So there's times in my life, as assertive as I am, where I've been overly supportive.
Yeah.
And actually, I look at myself and I think, and I reflect on it and go, I was far too tolerant of that situation for too long, because it was that person and it was because of these circumstances, and I should have acted.
Yeah.
And there's times where you've probably gone, I jumped in with 2 feet there and I was far too assertive too quick. So any of us can be more supportive or overly assertive in the time. You'll generally have a bit of a default position and a bit of a pattern. Mine usually is I am more assertive than supportive. So to reach the chasm, I've got to think about the supportive elements of leadership. However, there's been times, only a few, where I've been far too tolerant and supportive, and I haven't dealt with a situation like I usually would have.
Yeah, but you reflect on that and you learn from that, and you've openly shared that, haven't you? You said, I would have done that differently, same as I would, almost the opposite way around, say, would I have wanted to work for me in those first 2 years when I left the forces? I got the job done, and other people who thought like me enjoyed working with me because they got the job done, same as me. But there will have been other people who could probably reflect on that and go, she's a bit of a ball buster, to be quite honest. Just getting the job done. And it wasn't because I wasn't empathetic. It's because it was how I'd been managed. So I just carried that on. Had to find my own way.
I think what's a really interesting question, if you're listening to this, is we call it best self and shadow. So the psychometric we use is if your natural, the way you see the world, your motivations, if everything's been met naturally by the environment, the people around you, you will be the best version of you. And when we're in best self, we are very much better equipped to deal with challenges and problems, let's say. But the biggest question to ask yourself is when you're in your shadow, which means you feel challenged, compromised, angry, frustrated, whatever it might be, you will default to one of these sides of the chasm. You will default as a leader to assertive in your shadow. So I do. My default to wrestle back control is to start barking orders, being irritated, and telling people just to get things done.
Yeah.
I think when you're in shadow, what's interesting about you, I think when you're in shadow, I can think of cases where you go both. I can think of cases where you've been in both directions.
Yeah.
Where you'll either speak your mind and be assertive, or you'll go into a period of within yourself and go incredibly
quiet,
reflective and quiet.
Yeah.
I think you do that more than the other.
Yeah.
I think you retract and go reflective more than
I've learned to do that more.
Yeah.
Because that's a better way for me personally of trying to get back in the chasm quickly. Because it allows me time to reflect on, have I been a knobhead? Did I read that wrong? All those things. Whereas before, I probably would have jumped in and stated my case very quickly, and then later on thought, actually, I could have saw it from the other side. So I think it's actually a way of me balancing myself out.
Yeah. Just on that, I reckon if you ever have to ask yourself the question, have I been a knobhead? The answer's probably yes.
Exactly. Which is why I do it. So if I take myself off or I'm a bit quiet, I am being introspective, and actually usually the best bit comes out of that rather than me losing it or saying the wrong thing. So I've just found over the years that's better for me.
Yeah, you retract the supportive side and retract a little bit, and I go back over to the assertive side, and it's not always productive. So where you go in your shadow is an indicator to which side of the chasm you probably naturally sit on in leadership.
Yeah.
But what we're saying here is the principle of the most optimal place to be at any point in time is the chasm, which is you are absolutely supportive of your people. You're signaling, you have my support. We're in this together. However, we have a job to do. That's the chasm.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're on the assertive side, you're basically saying, we have a job to do.
Yeah.
When you're on the supportive side, you say, you have my support.
Yeah.
In either direction, that's not optimal. What we've got to do is find that chasm where you go, you have my support, we're in this together, but there's a job to do.
Here's the plan. Yeah.
That's the sweet spot. So leading in the chasm is key. And knowing whether you've got to dial it down from being overly assertive or you've got to dial it up from being too passive and supportive.
Yeah.
That is the key, isn't it?
And it's communication and language and actions, behaviors, and all those things that kind of give people the indication as to where we are.
Let me ask you a question and put you on the spot.
Oh, crikey.
Which do you think is the hardest? Dialing up from supportive to the chasm or dialing it down from assertive?
Oh, that is hard.
Or are they equally difficult in just different ways?
Because obviously I'm built to be basically both sides, I suppose, if you look at my psychometrics. I would say for most people, if they're self-aware, it's probably harder to dial up from supportive because whereas you can always come back a few scales from being assertive and still be assertive, if that makes sense. That's what I would say.
I think I agree. And I think they're both difficult for different reasons because, believe me, when my chimp is out, right, and I'm overly assertive and the emotion is high and the cortisol is being released and my irritation and frustration kicks in, suppressing that emotion is difficult.
Yeah.
You've got to have an outlet, or you've got to be able to somehow, just open the pressure cooker a little bit and just let off some steam. There's very, very easy coping mechanisms to do that.
Of course.
Find your safe space, go to a separate room. Don't
have
do
a word.
it. And just find that release. But I think for people who genuinely avoid conflict and they feel incredibly uncomfortable in having really tough conversations, plucking up the courage to be able to do that effectively must be more difficult.
And authentically, because if it's completely not you, then you'll be anxious for acting that way anyway, because it doesn't feel natural. But then you'll also be extra anxious because you know that other people are looking at you thinking that isn't natural to that person. And that puts that extra pressure on you to sort of almost justify your actions a little bit, why you're, So I think authenticity is a big bit, isn't it? Because if you feel that people perceive you in that moment as hugely different as a human, then that's going to put that extra pressure on you, I think. Whereas obviously when you're full chimp out, like you say, there's things you can put in place, or I don't know, you can still be assertive, but there's almost like this sliding scale almost of this is still assertive, but a bit quieter. So it's getting that balance, isn't it?
When it comes to high performance and high performing teams, the reason we're talking about this is because when we look at high performance environments here at T2, whether it's in elite sports, public sector, or in the corporate world, we see the chasm being so important, because where organizations place equal amounts of importance on people and performance as in results, that's where the magic happens. And I think, but if we just look at the lesser of the two evils, people who are organizations and teams who are overly assertive, they might drive disengagement from their people, and they might not cater for feelings and emotions as much, but they're still going to drive accountability, urgency, and outcome. Yes, it will be at a cost long term. Yes, it'll be at a cost long term, and you'll probably experience churn of staff and burnout and all the rest of it, but you're still driving performance. People who are overly on the supportive side, your people might love you, your teams might feel safe and calm and relaxed, but in the absence of results and outcomes, that's a bigger problem. And it's a big problem. And I think what I would say to people listening to this is, what's ironic about that is, if you've got the supportive side nailed and you've got your people behind you and you've got a good environment, you've got a golden opportunity, a platform from which to build from, but you've got to be daring. This is what you're talking about. At times, you've got to dial up your leadership to step into the chasm and say, this is all well and good and it feels fantastic, guys, but we're not really delivering what we need to deliver upon right now. So we need to crank up the urgency here.
I need a little bit more.
I need some more.
And if you've got good psychological safety and rapport, then people just go, what do you need? They don't question it, do they? So actually, if you've got that balance right, then dipping into assertive doesn't feel as big a deal.
So let me ask this then. Yes, you're correct. And in a lot of cases that will happen. What happens though when certain team members perceive that supportive nature of the leader as a weakness, and then you jump into the chasm as a leader and you ask for accountability and you don't get it because they think, what are you going to do?
And you know what? I think I've had numerous conversations about this with organisations, because some of it's policies, procedures, things they've put in place because they've been too supportive. And some of it is, we've got to say, procedures and policies that we have to follow rather than just the leader being overly supportive. It does put a few barriers in the way, doesn't it? Because it's not just a hearts and minds thing then. It goes beyond that, because people almost look at those policies and procedures to fall back on, and what can you do about it? You've got to give me that support. We've got to say that does happen. Whereas at the other end of the scale, it's sometimes harder work to pull it back because you're having to rely on KPIs, outputs, and all those other things. So
yeah, there's definitely that. And I think there's one big thing for me where if I coach a leader and they're overly on the supportive side and they want to get in the chasm more and they want to start, driving some expectation and accountability, and they feel like there's certain team members who are not taking them seriously or whatever it might be, the first question I ask them is, what's the consequence of them not doing this? And secondarily,
Yeah.
has there ever been any consequence
Yes.
to them not doing this? And what they do is they sort of slump in the chair because they quickly realise that these people have never, ever had any consequence
Accountability.
to that accountability piece in the chasm. So you wonder why you try and achieve it, and you pick up the courage to step in and have the tough conversation, and it falls on deaf ears, or it never happens, because in the absence of consequence, there is no reason for them to come with you.
No.
So the first thing I would say to anyone listening to this, if you're struggling, pluck in the courage to get into the chasm and start having tough conversations and being more assertive around the accountability and the results piece and the expectations is only part of it. You have to be willing to follow through with consequence if there's no change.
Yeah. And it can be different in, I'm just thinking public, private, all those things.
Public sector have a classic challenge with this.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just thinking,
what consequence can there be sometimes in the public sector?
So they're
you can't hire
supportive.
and fire, right?
Yeah.
And they know that sometimes.
Yeah. And actually, it's quite interesting because you think about that from just the chasm's perspective. We've got quite a lot of directive style going on in terms of how we do things, but we've got a supportive mechanism for how we manage our people. So there should be a way of having that chasm situation, but as you say, we can't always do too much because we're too supportive, whereas in other businesses, more commercial businesses, we're maybe too cutthroat sometimes, and it is all around KPIs, not KWIs. We just spoke about that
because they do have the power to fire and performance planning and all the rest of it. But going back to the public sector one, I think the biggest challenge or the biggest opportunity they have to find the chasm and drive accountability at the fear of consequence would be around the tribe.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is what we're all committing to. And if you're not going to, be responsible for your piece of the pie, then you answer to the tribe, as in the team, the group.
Yeah.
And that can be very exposing for people. They don't want to be cast out of the tribe, and they don't want to let people down, or generally humans don't. So where the accountability piece is not just coming from the manager, it comes from the group. So that crowd contagion theory kicks in. That's what the best public sector teams do. They're accountable to each other. The consequence is letting each other down, not getting fired. Sometimes in the right teams, when the leader's got most of or the majority of people on side, that can be a really effective tool for them to use. In the private sector, you've got many more tools in your arsenal. I mean, there can be a consequence to not doing what I'm asking you to do. That can be your job. It can be.
Yeah, of course it is. And it's definitely
it shouldn't be the sole it shouldn't be the sole reason or the consequence, but it's something you can progress towards if this repetitive behavior continues.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's a powerful tool.
It is. And we shouldn't really, in theory, have to get there if we're having good conversations and we're holding people accountable all the time. We shouldn't,
but we should always be unapologetic around going there if we need to.
Yeah. Yeah, because sometimes we need shocking out of a situation, don't we?
Sometimes people don't change, T.
No.
Sometimes people are, as much as you're finding that supportive, assertive style, as much as you're being firm and fair, as much as they just cannot get themselves in a mindset that will follow you into that chasm. And if they can't, then a strength of a leader is someone who will deal with that.
Yeah.
And not apologize for it. As much as we'd like to think that all humans are worth developing, all people come around in the end. With the right support and with the right environment, people can flourish. And we generally believe that. But not in every case.
No, and sometimes it's actually a duty of care to that individual because, in the situation of like high performing teams and, innovative environments, some people like the idea of working there, but the reality isn't for them. And they can openly admit that it's just too much. And actually the right thing to do in both cases is to have that person, make a decision to move somewhere else or try a different role. It's not always about, you don't fit our expectations. It's what's right for that person as well, isn't it?
It is. All right. With 6 or 7 minutes left, let's just go into the final piece, which is some of the questions you can ask yourself as a leader if you need to dial it up or dial it down. Remembering that what we're saying here is there's two general sides, supportive leader, assertive leader, and the chasm is where we straddle the two and we get the fine blend of saying, you have my support, we're in this together, but we have expectations, accountability, and results to achieve. So if you're more on the supportive side or you feel you're not getting that traction on the commitment and accountability and the outcomes, a couple of questions you've got to ask yourself to find out the answers to how I get in the chasm. Okay. I'd say number one is, are we delivering optimal results? you can only answer that question if you've defined what those results are and the outcome is.
What does
in the
good
first
look
place.
like? Yeah.
9 times when I ask leaders that question in a one-to-one, it's very hard to answer because there's no definition of what that result is.
No, unless it's tied to a KPI somewhere.
Or a vision or a goal.
Yeah. And does everyone understand that as well?
And have you actually been clear on that?
Yeah.
So are we delivering optimal results against the required outcome? Number 2, are we focusing on the right priorities?
Okay.
Sometimes we can be busy fools. We can have too much stuff going on. Our effectiveness is diluted. So actually, I'm not getting the accountability and the results I need, but it's not their fault because I'm not prioritizing and giving them a fighting chance.
Yeah.
Number 3, I put, are we using our time wisely? Ties into 2. Where are we spending our time? Listen,
we've got to give clarity and direction, haven't we?
But are people being lazy?
Yeah, complacent as well.
So when I look at time, I look at, are people, I'm not expecting people to work their fingers to the bone every second of every day, but over a course of a day and a week, are we putting in the significant contribution required to drive this? Because if not, we've got a work ethic issue.
Yeah.
And that sometimes can be a problem. Number 4, do we have urgency to act? Is there time frames? Is there deadlines, milestones incoming, or are we just coasting? And that's why I'm not getting the outcomes. Have I defined those milestones and those time frames?
Sometimes we assume we've communicated as well because we're having regular contact. But actually, we then realise if we go question our people, they still don't actually understand us. So don't assume you've communicated just because you've spoken to someone. You still have to be clear about it, don't you?
Well, there's an old saying, isn't there? In everything we do, it doesn't matter what the problem is, communication is the answer.
Absolutely.
And it could be the case here. So if you're on that supportive side and you needed to dial it up a little bit, I need to dial up the urgency, get in that chasm, just ask yourself those 4 questions. If the answer's within there, it'll give you some ideas to address that with the team and just start. Because if you can set the expectations around the results, the time frames, the priorities, and why the urgency to act is, you don't have to do anything else than that. That's enough to get people in the chasm sometimes.
No, the supportiveness will actually get them there because you'll go, right, we're going to do it now, so here's the plan.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you need? Yeah.
So dialing it up can be can be easy if you answer those questions and give them some clarity on that and the why.
Yeah.
They will come with you if you've got that supportive side nailed. Dialing down from assertive, couple of questions. Are people communicating and open? If people have retracted within themselves, maybe the answer is that I'm overly being assertive here and I'm not engaging people.
Yeah, they're just kind of doing what they're told and not... got you. Okay.
And I'm just going to nail these 3 because we've got a couple of minutes left. Number 2, are we falling into groupthink, presenteeism? Are people just stopping contributing because they don't think that they've got a voice and what I say goes, so there's no point in giving up?
Yeah, loudest voice wins.
And at the time of being the assertive leader, you will have the loudest voice. Probably.
And it's I won't argue because it'll just hold things up sometimes as well, right?
I'll just concede. Yeah. Number 3, are there signs of toxicity or negativity rumbling within the team?
Ooh, yeah.
Chinese whispers, people talking to people.
Yeah.
Big sign that you're not on the supportive side at all.
Yeah.
And finally, do we have hearts and minds? Have I lost the hearts and minds, or do I still have them?
You can feel it, can't you?
It's a feeling. I know it sounds fluffy, but you sense it, don't you?
Yeah, you could ask it. I think the answer to that is that even when the chips are down, when you are communicating, are people still open to your input, you change, and are they going, right, what's next? Or are they sort of still head down, not communicating and actually
waiting for instructions? I'll do what you tell me to do rather than me proactively contribute. Yeah. And feel passionate about this and contribute to the endeavour. So, with a minute left, T, the chasm of supportive assertive leadership is still ongoing in terms of the work we're pushing out there, but this dialing up and dialing down is something to think about. Great leaders are aware of which side of the chasm they're on at any one time, and they can either dial up into the chasm from supportive, or if they're being overly assertive, they can dial it down a little bit and engage their people.
Yeah.
If you balance, you have my support and we're in this together, but we're here to do a job, that's where high-performing teams really flourish and where high performance happens in leadership.
Yeah.
Overly assertive, you're going to drive outcomes but lose your people. Overly supportive, you're going to engage your people but you're going to lose your performance.
Yeah.
Find the chasm by dialing it up or dialing it down. Any final words, T, with 30 seconds?
I just think the only person that can make those decisions are you. You've got to look at yourself, look at what feels right for you, what feels authentic and what the truth is. And sometimes the psychometric testing is the only way you can really look at that in depth and make a difference.
Yeah, being authentic is key. Don't fool yourself that you're being fair if you're not. Yeah. And don't fool yourself that you're being assertive if you're not.
Definitely.
Be honest, and then you can take the step into the chasm by dialing it up or dialing it down. T, loved that.
As always.
We'll come back and do another one on that, but that's it for now, and we'll be back shortly with another T2 Hubcast.
Introducing the T2 Leadership Retreat 2023, the ultimate leadership development experience from the people performance people. Join us at the prestigious Grove Resort in Hertfordshire for our annual leadership retreat, where you will be joined by other senior industry leaders in this immersive 3-day experience. The T2 Leadership Retreat will include a 3-night all-inclusive stay at the 5-star Grove Resort, multiple leadership tasks, sessions and challenges, an in-depth personal leadership 360 report, an exciting off-site activity at a nearby location, as well as access to psychometric profiling and self-awareness tools. The retreat will be facilitated by experienced professionals from the world of business, the military and professional sport, and will feature high-profile guest speakers Sir Dave Brailsford, Director of Sport for Ineos, and former New Zealand Rugby Union captain Sean Fitzpatrick. To book your place on the ultimate leadership experience of the year, or for more information, please contact help@transferperformance.com.
Are you a fan of our podcast? If so, make sure you're following us on all of our social media channels. You can find us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter by searching Trans2 Performance. By following us, you'll have access to exclusive content, special announcements, and more. Join the T2 community today.